Ed Foundation, I would like to welcome you to our second annual joint event, Haverhill Reads, an Initiative for School Success. My name is Joanna Dix. I'm the president of Haverhill Ed Coalition. In case you are unfamiliar with Haverhill Ed Coalition, we're a grassroots organization. We're made up of community members, teachers, parents, and our mission is to promote high-quality public education for all of Haverhill students. Before we get started, I'd like to recognize our elected officials that have joined us. We're going to begin with Mayor Fiorentini, who's actually going to offer us a couple minutes of welcome to Consentino. So, yes. I have a list.
You're going to?
Yeah.
She's going to introduce the other elected officials, and that's great. I hate to do that, because if you introduce 99 people, the only one that notices is the 100th. The new superintendent will be by a little bit later, Margaret Marotta. Oh, she's here. Oh, great. I thought you were going to be late, Margaret. Great. Welcome. We're thrilled to welcome you on board. And I'm thrilled to be here tonight to support this program. All of you in this school, by the way, which we are going to renovate and make it beautiful. And I thank the City Council for voting for that the other night. I'm thrilled to be here tonight to support this program. We all know about the education gap and its cousin, the achievement gap, that poor children don't do as well in education or later on in achievement as richer children. When does it start? Well, the answer is it starts very early. The studies are that by age 3, poor children have heard 30 million fewer words than children from upper-income families. 30 million word gap. What do we do about it? Well, we support programs like this. We support early literacy, kindergarten and pre-K programs, which I'm a strong advocate of. We support summer school programs. Thank you. We support summer school programs to close the achievement gap. And we do everything we can so that no matter what area of the city you come from, no matter what income your parents have, you have an equal opportunity in life. And I'm here tonight to listen, to learn what more we can do. Thank you for doing this, and thank you for inviting me.
All right, thank you, Mayor. We're now going to welcome our other elected officials. We have quite a few in the building. We have Representative Vargas. He had to step out for a second, but we can still give him a round of applause. He will be back. He's on our panel. We have City Council President John Mitchison. City Councilor Tim Jordan. City Councilor Bill Masick. City Councilor Melinda Barrett. School Committee Member Gail Sullivan. School Committee Member Sven Amirian. School Committee Member Rich Rosa. And again, we want to offer our thanks to the incoming superintendent, Margaret Marotta, for coming and joining us tonight. And if there is any elected officials I forgot, please raise your hand. I don't want to leave anyone out. All right. All right, and now something that's kind of dear to my heart. If you're an educator in the room, a para, a teacher, or a principal, can you please stand up? On behalf of the community, we want to thank you for being here. We recognize your hard work. We know what you do each and every day, and we thank you for your continued commitment to our students. So thank you. All right, so tonight our mission is to engage the community in a discussion on the importance of grade level reading and what Haverhill can do to ensure that all of our students achieve reading proficiency. We will first hear from our keynote speakers, Amy O'Leary and Titus Dos Remedios, who will walk us through what research has shown on grade level reading, as well as talk about the strategies that have worked for communities across Massachusetts. Following that, we have a great diverse panel of local educators, elected officials, and citizens to discuss strategies for improving grade level reading in Haverhill specifically. You have been provided with question cards. If you don't have a question card and you would like a question card, please raise your hand. We have volunteers that will come around and hand those out. If you would like to ask a question of anyone on our panel, please write down your question and we will fill them out, or we won't fill them. We will take them from you before the panel starts, after the presentation, and then we will try to answer as many as we can in the amount of time we have. All right, so now without further ado, I would like to introduce our keynote speakers from Strategies for Children, Titus Dos Remedios and Amy O'Leary. Strategies for Children is an advocacy and policy organization that works to ensure that Massachusetts invests the resources needed for all children from birth to age 5 to access high-quality early education programs that prepare them for success in school and life. Titus Dos Remedios is Director of Research and Policy at Strategies for Children, where he analyzes early education policy, research data, and the state budget to inform strategies for children's advocacy and communications. Amy O'Leary is Director of Strategies for Children's Early Education for All campaign. She is a former preschool teacher and program director, and in March 2017 was elected President-elect of the Governing Board of the National Association for the Education of Young Children. So if we can welcome them.
Never heard so much hooting and hollering for elected officials. As you heard, I'm a former preschool teacher turned lobbyist for early education, the Early Education for All campaign, and my colleague Titus was also a teacher in the classroom, and I've been at Strategies for Children for 15 years, and Titus has been there for 8. And so we are thrilled to be here in Haverhill to talk with you tonight, to hear from the panel, and to share some information with you. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about our organization. We have some data to share about Haverhill and the state around third grade reading. We're going to talk about a report that we commissioned back in 2010 that had recommendations around third grade reading. We're going to tell you a little bit about the policy that's the landscape in Massachusetts, and talk about other cities that are engaged in this work, and then really talk about a plan for action and what community members and local leaders and elected officials can do to support this issue. These are our core competencies as an organization. We are a nonprofit. We rely on funding from private organizations and philanthropy to do our work. We hope that someday we'll put ourselves out of business and that all children in Massachusetts will have the resources they need for a high-quality early education experience. But as you can see, we monitor the policy. We work with early educators across the state and local leaders to help build political awareness. Really, the founder of our organization wanted to use a political lens for young children to get early education on the top of the political agenda in Massachusetts. We advocate. We do not do our own research, but we analyze and summarize and can collect research that help us make the case. And we also have been working more frequently in local communities around this implementation to support young children. And this is kind of what we think about when we think about our big vision. As we are really focused on the birth to 5 space, but we know that early education goes up through age 8. And so we want to make sure in Massachusetts and all over across the country, we have language-rich home environments, high-quality infant-toddler services, high-quality pre-K, high-quality full-day kindergarten, and really strong instructions for the early grades.
Thank you, Amy. So we're not going to spend too much time talking about data tonight, but I do want to share some quick data highlights on the next generation MCAS test, which was administered last spring. This is just so you all are aware, the third grade test in Massachusetts is the first universal benchmark of children's progress. So it's the first glimpse we have, both reading and math, of how young children are doing. Now, all of the research, as Mayor Fiorentini mentioned earlier, the research shows that you can't wait till third grade. You have to start much earlier, and that these gaps form very early. However, as advocates, we have found it helpful to highlight the third grade reading performance, and as almost a way to start the conversation that you all are having here in Haverhill. The first slide shows 30% of Haverhill third graders met or exceeded expectations in reading. That's a little lower than the state average of 47%. Now, when we compare Haverhill to similar comparison cities, we find that it still trails behind Salem, Leominster, Westfield, Barnstable, Peabody, Quincy. These are small cities with demographics similar to Haverhill. And we actually chose these based on some work that Thomas Granneman, who is here today, on his website, the Benchmarking Haverhill Schools. He did that analysis to find what communities were similar. We think that's a good strategy for you to keep going forward as a way to try and compare how Haverhill is doing. But this isn't just a challenge for Haverhill. So reading proficiency is a statewide challenge. This map, we don't expect you to read the size 2 font on some of these cities here, but purple means that less than 70% of children meet the standard. It means that, yeah, excuse me, let me try that again. The dark purple is less than 40% meet the expectation. And then the medium shades of purple are 40% to 69% meet or exceed expectations in reading. Very few communities have between 70 and 85% proficient. So we know in Massachusetts that we often get touted as #1, an education state, an education leader. #1 is not good enough when we look at the data that shows so many children continue to struggle. Now you can also look at some historical trends, and here we have Haverhill as the orange line, and then the dotted line is the state average. So right around 2005, 2006, it looks like the city of Haverhill started to fall a little behind the state average. When you add income, and you can add race, income, special ed, whichever group you're interested in learning more about, but this slide shows the income gaps, you'll see that for low-income students, that's that pink line. So in Haverhill, 37% of our low-income students from low-income families, score proficient on the test. Lags behind 66% for that light blue line at the top. Those are children from non-low-income households. And that gap has been pretty constant since 2003 when it was first measured. Now, why does this matter? We don't want to spend too much time focused on the data. We want to know really what's the big deal? What is at stake here? Well, research shows that third grade reading is a research-based indicator for future success in school and life. And what happens is that, and as any of you know who have taught young children who are emergent readers, skill begets skill. So if a child is having success early with reading, with fluency, with comprehension, they're more likely to want to read. They're more likely to want to keep reading things that interest them and find books that they like and read with their friends and so on. So the stakes are high, and we know from some studies that the children who fall behind will continue to struggle. So 3/4 of children who struggle with reading in third grade will continue to struggle throughout school. Children who do not read proficiently by the end of third grade are 4 times less likely to graduate high school by age 19. And there have been some economic studies of, the cost of not finishing high school. We know 80% of Haverhill ninth graders graduate in 4 years. but the average high school dropout in Massachusetts costs taxpayers an estimated $349,000 more over his or her lifetime than the average graduate. And that's just due to, a combination of factors, social services, or maybe it's unemployment or healthcare, all of those things that really compound in life and that we're seeing more and more from research can keep people from that opportunity, can keep people from achieving what they want in life.
And as we advocated for high-quality early education in Massachusetts, we have used the legislative process as our vehicle. So since 2002, we have filed a bill each legislative session. And one of our bills died in the legislature, but ultimately was passed through the budget that created the Department of Early Education and Care. It's because we believe there should be a high-level state agency focused on young children. As we advocated, people would give us thumbs up in the legislature. Most people are for high-quality early education. But the challenge has been we have not seen the funding flow. We have not seen our priorities shift from, if we know that it makes a difference, how are we doing things differently? Another piece we like to point out about the graph, if you think of the reading proficiency, if you look at the state numbers, we are basically where we started, right? It's a new set of third graders every year, but we went to see those lines going up and they have remained flat. And we have spent billions of dollars trying to get at that achievement gap by doing things like focusing, in first and second grade. So we wanted to use this data as a way to turn the focus to earlier, because we know that if we give children a stronger foundation, everything else on the education agenda becomes easier. So in 2010, we commissioned a report by Dr. Noni Lasso from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, because we visited, once we looked closer at the data, most people, because they hear that we're number one, think that we're around, like your hometown would be 70% of kids are reading it proficient. And when people saw their local hometown numbers, especially legislators, they wondered what we could be doing. So we commissioned this report that really talked about how state government, local elected officials, and people who are working with children and families from birth through age 8 could really support early language and literacy development. And it was very wide. People really enjoyed this report because it was actionable. It talked about different recommendations for all these different groups of people. And we know, what is it going to take? So first is defining reading success, then recognizing that it starts at birth. We heard about the word gap, the 30 million word gap, and then ensuring high-quality experience in settings where children learn. And then alignment across the birth to third continuum. And that has been some of the most exciting work that we've seen happen in local communities when people really think about where are young children and how can we best support them through their educational journey. We also know that the language and literacy development is aligned with a child's age and grade level. And in early education, we often talk about what is developmentally appropriate. And sometimes learning through play is the best way to learn. So we want to make more hooting and hollering. I love it. I'm going to take you on the road with me. And you can see some of these pieces. When we started this work, we hired a director of reading proficiency who had expertise in thinking about these issues at the classroom and program level to think about how we could think about recommendations for policy. So these are some of the things that you want to make sure are happening for young children. And then, when should they be happening? We know that as children are growing up from birth, there are often developmental milestones that you're looking out for as parents and as educators. The same is true around watching children's reading progression. Another piece of data that we heard from practitioners was, no one ever taught me how to teach children how to read. And you think about how many teachers are working so hard with so many varied experiences. At some points, we know that children coming into kindergarten have maybe a 60-month gap between kids who have had experience and kids who have not had experience. So managing that in your classroom can be a really tough thing to do. So this gives a nice, it's on the back page of our report to kind of give some milestones along the way to think about how young children should be developing their skills. And then we thought about these components, which were the parts of the report that often get talked about when you think about language and literacy. So first is, what is the program designed to do? When we originally started working with local communities, we had communities make a list of all their early literacy programs. And small communities had 30 to 40 early literacy programs. And then when we had the next meeting, which was, and what's the impact of those programs, we learned that on the continuum, most of them were geared to raise awareness around early literacy, to give books away, to have backpacks, to have pizza nights, to have read-alouds. But what we know makes a difference is high-quality instruction and supporting readers. So thinking about what you're designing programs for and what outcomes you hope to get is a critical piece of this puzzle. Yes, you need the books, but we can't expect just by giving books out that we are going to see the needle move. Assessment has been another issue that continually comes up. As Titus said, third grade is the first benchmark that we have of young children, and we know that that's too late for intervention. So how do we think about developmentally appropriate assessment and figuring out where children are in that journey and giving them the supports that they need? Professional development for educators, supporting them in their work inside and outside the classrooms to help build their confidence and knowledge base to help support readers. Curriculum, which we know is a big price tag for many districts, and what comes along with curriculum, the assessment are often together. So who's making those decisions? How is it being implemented? And are we asking key questions that, is this working for our children in our community? And then partnerships with families, which sometimes gets overlooked and is a critical piece of this puzzle. We have seen policy highlights, so we commissioned the report, and based on that report, we worked on a piece of legislation that actually passed in one session, and it was an act relative to third grade reading proficiency, and it helped establish an early literacy expert panel whose job it was to basically look at the landscape in Massachusetts and think about what we could do better. And also take stock of what we already were doing, so not coming up with a million new programs, but think about what we were already doing. That panel continues to meet now and is working on recommendations around screening and assessment for children starting in pre-K and kindergarten. 6 cities in Massachusetts joined the National Campaign for Grade Level Reading, which is over 350 communities from across the country have made a commitment, have gotten together as a community and made a plan to think about how to tackle these issues. And we are the state lead and work with the 6 communities that you see up there. Massachusetts was awarded the federal preschool expansion grant, which is $15 million a year for 4 years to support new high-quality seats for 4-year-old children in communities. And you can see it was Boston, Lawrence, Lowell, Springfield, and and Holyoke that were awarded. But the other good news that we'll talk about is the planning grants, which we know that Haverhill was just awarded recently, which we're so excited for you guys to have that funding to think about what you can do. Yep.
So the state grants that we've seen come out of both the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed and the Department of Early Education and Care have really spurred innovation at the local level, but they reach very few communities. Anybody know how many cities and towns there are in Massachusetts? Oh, wow. Okay, 351. This is a very smart audience. So well, it's written there too. Did you do these slides or did I? Only 12 districts are highlighted in orange. So out of all 351, only 12 received, in this case, it was a Birth to Third Alignment Partnership grant from EEC. There was a grant in 2009, 2011 called the Pre-K to 3 grant from DESE. 40 districts participated in that. More recently, we've seen preschool expansion and planning grants reach 18 districts. So our strategy, I mean, we are at the state level where we're kind of think of this early education issue as one statewide policy that would help lift every community, but what we know is that the locals are really leading the way. When local communities get together and figure out what their local needs are, they can come up with local solutions that are a little bit more customized and perhaps more effective than the state might, thinking of like a one-size-fits-all approach. And these are the communities that have done preschool planning. So fiscal year 2016 saw 13 communities funded. And you can see the list there: Lawrence, Lowell, and our partners in Springfield, Worcester, New Bedford. Those were sort of the early adopters, the first round of communities to focus on preschool. FY17, last year, Boston and Salem also received planning grants. And then this year, we have Northampton, Lee, and Haverhill joining the group. So we can't thank you enough for applying for this grant. We think that you can't really be ready and on the short list of communities that could get funding unless you have a plan, unless you are mobilized and active at the local community. So we see this community readiness as an essential piece of really being ready for state resources or federal funding should some new policies pass at the state or federal level.
And these are just our goals as we think about moving these issues forward. So we do have a bill pending in the legislature that would expand preschool access. It has two components: that you have to be ready with a plan as a community, and you also have to be a high-need community. And so the legislative session formally ends on July 31st, so we have a couple more months, Rep. Vargas, to try to get this out of, it's out of the Education Committee. It's in the, okay. It's in the House Ways and Means Committee. We want to continue to keep this momentum going. And even the preschool planning grants are about $200,000, which is not a large line item. But we want to keep building this community of advocates who have plans, who are ready, because what we're finding is people are making plans and then they're wondering, well, where is the implementation dollars? And that's where the advocacy comes in. Our long-term goals are really, we also have a very strong focus on the workforce because we know this work cannot get done effectively if we do not support early educators who are doing this work every day. And we know that we want to have more children enrolled in high-quality programs. And defining high quality in school readiness. Massachusetts does not have a definition of what school readiness means. We have seen local communities come up with some of those definitions and think about how to align their programs to meet that, to meet those definitions. And so as part of our strategy, we have a communications consultant, and she writes our blog, which is I in Early Education, and we've also commissioned her to do some in-depth stories of local community planning. What we have found is there aren't many things written down on paper on how communities have come together. So right now we have stories on Springfield and 4 towns in Cape Cod that came together to look at this issue. So one of the things we've been inspired by is to see how local communities are doing things a little bit differently and really keeping their own families in the center of it and not trying to solve all the problems of the state, but to really look locally and to see what they already have as assets and resources, what they need, and how they're going to get there together. One of the most critical pieces of this work is that at the local level, it's nobody's only job to wake up to wonder what's happening to children birth to 5. It's a lot of people's jobs in a little bit of a ways, but we don't really have an air traffic controller at the local level to help support what that continuum could look like. We have seen communities come up and fund positions to help start get this work going. We also know that local communities don't necessarily know where the children are. So where are the 4-year-olds? Where are the 3-year-olds? What do families want and need? Do they want play groups? Do they need childcare? What does it look like? And people often think that they know the answer, but when it comes to implementation, what we learned from the federal grant is that you really have to know. You can't have a state wait list to make local decisions. So that has been very empowering for local communities to better understand their wants and needs.
So very quickly, I know we're almost out of time for our keynote speech right now, but I do want to mention school district staffing. So this was a question we got as we were trying to think about what to talk about to you all in Haverhill. And we actually reached out to our colleague, Kelly Kulsrud, who works with Noni Lasso at a group called Lectio. She's formerly a colleague of ours. She stressed three things with the school district and really the community's strategy: that things need to be consistent, coherent, and intentional. And that the staffing positions themselves should be a gateway to that. So if you hire, for example, a pre-K to grade 3 literacy coordinator, or or a coach, or some position like that, there's plenty of work for that person to do, right? Just within pre-K through grade 3. However, that person can't be an island, unto themselves, doing work, that no one else in the community understands. So really what you want is complementary positions and teams that can approach this as a little bit more of a strategic attack, I guess I would say. And Cambridge is one example. They have a family liaison there who is a Title I position, works with the district literacy department, but because she sees families firsthand and the needs that they have, she's able to go to these different meetings throughout the district, the literacy team and other teams, to reinforce some of the messages kind of as a two-way street. Learn what the school wants to communicate to families, and also bring some insight back to the school leaders about what families say works for them. And then our friend Kelly, her quote is, "Avoid a quick fix solution that isn't connected to an overall plan." So try and be thinking in those terms. None of the communities we have talked about today, or none of the 300 that are part of the national campaign, have completely solved this, all right? It's something that takes time and persistence and real clear strategy that folks are committed to over time.
And that brings us to our message for local leaders, which is also for leaders in the community. So thinking about building relationships, which we know are obviously strong here, but even thinking further, how can you deepen these relationships? How can you think about, get out of your lane, what you're normally thinking about every day, and lift your head up and see how you can make stronger connections? Getting organized, we talked about this, about the data. We have a gap in data in Massachusetts, which is a big, big challenge. Raising awareness and changing behavior. Hand out the books, but also think about how you're measuring impact of what you're doing. And then stay the course. When Margaret Blood created Strategies for Children, she created the Early Education for All campaign and thought we would probably get that done in about 5 to 10 years. And it's almost 20 years later, and we're still working on some of these issues. And we know that here locally, you have been working on many of these issues, often, I'm sure, with the same people sitting around the table. So our message is, we feel that with this community work happening, we are going to see a tipping point at the state. We know how important it is for your local elected officials to hear from you about what you want to see happen in the state, but we also know that we need to help give solutions and policy recommendations, and then be willing to stand behind them when the going gets tough. When you think about, when we're all competing for funding and for resources, we need to think about these cohesive plans as a way to move this, because we know that the difference is going to be made in these children's lives. So we are so thrilled to be helping with Haverhill as you continue on this effort. We are available if people have questions or you want more information about the data. We'll be joining the panel after for Q&A. So if you have questions, please save them. We thank you very much for your attention, and we'll turn it over to the panel. Here, we're gonna grab you.
All right. Thank you, Titus and Amy, for your thought-provoking presentation. We're now going to be transitioning into the panel portion of our evening. So at this time, I'll invite our panelists to come up. And our moderator to come up, please. If you have a question for the panel, please put your card up in the air. We have some volunteers who are going to be coming around and collecting them. All right. And if you have not done a question but still would like to, it's not too late. You can go out and grab a card and then give it to Spencer over there. All right. So tonight our panel will be moderated by Noemi Custodia Laura, Dr. Custodia Laura, is the Vice President of the Lawrence Campus and Community Relations for Northern Essex Community College. She is an educator with expertise in math and natural science curriculum development. She holds a PhD in endocrinology and molecular biology from Boston University. So thank you.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be here. When I was originally asked to moderate this event, I got very excited, and as you heard, from my background is in science, and so I did some research around. And if you Google the Center for Early Literacy Learning that is funded by the U.S. Department of Education, you will see tons of research that talks about the importance of early reading. And one of the quotes that is very famous that, again, you can Google anything. It says that it's never too early to start reading to infants. And it's one of those things that the impact that it has on infants as early as being newborns is that it helps them to advance with the early language and literacy development, as well to conceptual development, and the difference between children when you start reading to them from the time they're infants to the ones that you don't start, sometimes it can be a gap of 30% in advance in their development. So that is something that is very important. And the other piece with that is not mentioned is that it also builds relationship with the children, because now you're spending more time with your kids. So early reading is really good in many levels. So here we have in the panel, we have Representative Andy Vargas, who focuses on state policy and funding for early education. Then we have Diane Palmaccio, focused on reading in the classroom, challenges and solutions. Welcome. Then we have Rashawn Martin, focused on what Haverhill schools are doing now, any unmet needs, focus areas to address. We have then Tom Grainman, focused on community support for making reading proficiency a priority for school administrations and funding. And we have school committee member Gail Sullivan, focusing on local school policy, objective, and opportunities. So we would like to start with Andy, and we would like to know from your perspective, what are the things that have been happening at the State House that relate to this important work in early education. What is your strategy?
Sure. Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here. My strategy is to work with Strategies for Children. Thank you. So look, I think
Funding.
We had a great overview from Strategies for Children now, which I think is great, looking at sort of the different bills that we're looking at in the Education Committee right now. The one that she mentioned, I was happy to support to get out of committee. But I think from my perspective and from the conversations that we're having in the state legislature, we're looking to redefine the definition of public education. Because when you think about the history of public education, we as a society in America one day woke up and said, it's a problem that only a certain class of people can afford education, right? And so we expanded that and we provided K through 12 for everybody. But now we know that public education is much more than just K through 12. We know that 85% of the brain is developed by age 5, and we know that in order to compete in today's economy, you need a workforce that has something after 12, whether it's college or training or some sort of apprenticeship program. And so how do we redefine the definition of public education to include pre-K, to include something after 12? And so a large focus that we've been working on in the Education Committee has been primarily on pre-K. The other part of this from the funding perspective is we haven't, the last time we really looked at our funding formula seriously for education was 1993, the year I was born, coincidentally. Yeah, I outed myself, I'm sorry. So that's a problem. We're in 2018, and things are a little bit different nowadays. Costs are different. The challenges are different. And so many of you have heard of what's called the Foundation Budget Review Commission, which put together some excellent recommendations as to how we could change that formula and several other factors within our education system. And so if you're looking for something to really get behind at the state level, it's not only early education, it's super important, but also take a look at the Foundation Budget Review Commission's recommendations. And I would ask the school committee members here tonight especially to consider joining the committees that have endorsed the commission's reviews so that we can continue to push that at the state level. Thank you.
And the follow-up question, Representative Andy Vargas.
Andy's fine, please.
Andy's fine, okay. Yeah. You earn it, but anyway. So do you think that, are there any talks in the funding formula for infants and toddlers?
Is there what?
In the funding formula, when they start talking about that again, do you know if there any consideration to add some funding to cover literacy for infants and toddlers?
Yeah, so I know there are particular grants that are available, but as far as I'm aware of in terms of overhauling our entire education system to include infants and toddlers, that's a long-term game, right? I think that's a long-term plan. So we've got to start somewhere. I think we can start with pre-K, while we also, at the local level, ensure that we're starting at birth and doing what we can here.
Thank you. Next, we have Diane.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay, I think I'm looking at it from a teacher's perspective, and I know to help these children, we first have to know who they are. This is a direct quote from my principal, Margaret Shepard. She knows it's very important for us to know who these children are. These at-risk children can be children that are already on special education plans. There are children who are English language learners. They're economically disadvantaged. They have health concerns. They have chronic absenteeism or tardiness. And with all those factors, it could be one or it could be several of the factors weighing on them, it's already a hard challenge for them to be a student in the school. I'm also involved with kindergarten screening. And over the years, I see children coming in that are already reading, but I see children that are coming in that don't even recognize their name yet. So that gap is already there starting. And we have something called a school readiness gap. And if 85% of their brain is developed by the time they're 5, we're already behind the game with that. And there are a lot of the building blocks to literacy that they need are not already there for them. Their oral language development is lacking. They don't have specific oral vocabulary related to school context, like if they're talking about a flower, they don't know what a stem is, they don't know what a petal is, things like that, that are really important for them to have. They're also not a motivation to read. One of my friends in the audience told me a really interesting story. She had board books at school with her kindergartners. And I thought this was very telling. She thought they'd be a wonderful thing, a way for them to start off enjoying and reading the books. She said this child took them out and started building with them, did not know that they were a book and what they were supposed to do with that book. They're already behind if they do not have some letter recognition and some sound recognition. Comprehensions of stories that are being read to them. If they're not familiar with a book and what to do with it and which direction the print goes, it's hard for them to be able to begin reading. And they don't even have early attempts at reading or writing. Many of them have not even held a pencil before they've come to us. So already with that readiness gap, they're already starting off behind. I think a lot of it at early age is we really have to work on parental involvement with our children. And we also, at the same time as knowing our children, have to know our parents. Are they people who have had a poor school experience themselves? Their prior experience prevents them from wanting to be involved in education or even wanting to come to school. Are they also at a language difficulty because they are ELL themselves, and they're not comfortable coming into school because of that language issue? Some of our parents are illiterate. How is it hard for them to be involved in their children's reading when for them, being able to admit that they can't read is also very difficult? And economically disadvantaged, we have many parents that are worried about where their next meal is going to come from. Are they going to lose their apartment? They have so many things on their plate that education is not necessarily top priority for them. So I believe that we need to help our parents and think about what's influencing them not being able to be involved with their children. If they're not comfortable in school and they're not comfortable talking with teachers, we need to investigate and find out who they're comfortable with, what we can do for them. Are there other locations? Are there other people that can talk with them and help them understand the importance of them and their children's education? And it's important for them to know how easy it is to help their child just by talking with them, showing them books, experiencing things with them, and helping them start on their way to education.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A follow-up question. Have you seen any strategies done in other towns or even other states that address some of those issues?
I have not seen them, but I have things and ideas that I dream of and that I wish could be true.
It can happen here.
I hope. I think you have to find venues, churches, maybe through Department of Social Services, places where they would be comfortable going and having people speak with them. I think having volunteers that are able to go out and show them. We used to do things called make and take, showing them how to make simple games, things they can do that aren't going to take a lot of their time, that isn't going to cost a lot of money, but a way they can enjoy educating and working with their children. I think we have to show them how simple it is to be a partner in their child's education.
That's great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next, we have Tom. Oh, no, sorry. I skipped. I was looking at Roshan, and no wonder you say that. I know. They look alike, isn't it? Twins.
Yeah. Well, Mrs. Scully and I have the same gray suit. The kids call me Mrs. Scully all the time. They do. Well, first, I'm thrilled to be here with Sean Martin, the social studies supervisor. Somewhere in the crowd, or maybe in the back there, is my graduate mate, Jill Taylor, Story, who was gracious enough to pick me up at the train station. Because I did have to go home to Boston. It was my turn to bring the kids to theater on Wednesday. Then I took the train to come back up. But the train back to Boston is at 9:10. So if you see me, duck out, like the president or somebody, then that's where I'm headed to the train station. So on one hand, you might be thinking, well, why in the world am I sitting here listening to the supervisor for social studies and world languages, right? At an early literacy event. Well, for starters, for my money, I know that my own subjects that are near and dear to my heart, history and world languages, are completely toast if the kids can't read and write. All right. So as I seek to build the nations of future historians, those skills have to be in place. And the literacy skills for the younger kids, is important for me. Also, because I know that as passionate as some of my second and first grade teachers are about history and social studies, they're not historians by trade, right? They didn't become a second grade teacher to teach about Columbus, right? They want to teach kids how to read. So it has been an important cause for me, and in a lot of ways also in our more recent absence of a direct supervisor for English language arts. I just thought it was incumbent upon myself, to continue to help the district, drive this agenda, because the kids can't wait, for us to get a body, right, responsible for that area. So let's talk about some of the things that we're trying to do. In a lot of ways, we've been trying to just close some gaps and get more consistent, right? I think the intentionality is actually pretty good here in Haverhill, but where we're missing really is is the consistency piece and maybe even the coherency piece. Just because you have some things that are happening well in one part of the city and maybe not in the other, or they're going on in one school and not in another school, and we're just trying to figure out where the gaps are and being able to trying to close them. So our largest initiative we have going on is our Leslie Literacy Program. It's also the longest one we have going on. And I think, and I think we've gotten a great, return on investment, from the places that have been able to implement it, with fidelity and consistently, with the coaching, like at Pentucket Lake, that's been able to do it from day one, since we brought the program on. But we have some schools in our district who have never even had the program in the building, and or the coach, and I had actually recently had done a completely revamped budget of the Leslie Literacy Program to try to close those gaps and see if we can get the training and the coaching across the entire district, because it's the little kids that are really missing it. And so we've been great at investing where, sort of fourth grade, third grade, and even in a lot of ways first and second grade, but there's a lot of kindergartners who aren't getting any of it. And so, but it doesn't do our third grade any good or our fourth grade any good if the kindergartners never got it. So that's a big piece. In the meantime, I've been on the stump for as many grant opportunities from the state as we can possibly get, where we really have gotten, really over $500,000 over the last, 2 or 3 school years, totally focused on early literacy. One big one was the focus on kindergarten program, which is a BPS product, and it actually does that sort of play to learn, type strategy, which I believe in because my kids did it themselves, who are in the Boston Public Schools, and so we went out and got those funds, and of course I said to the state, well, look, if you're not going to give me enough money to put this in all 32 of our kindergarten classrooms, I don't want it. But then they did, So we were able to implement the focus on K2 across all the 32 kindergarten classrooms here in the district, which has brought center-based learning, as part of one of our instructional strategies for our kindergarten teachers. And really it helps to build those independent skills, and helps to, teach kids at an early age to get some ownership, on their learning. And being able to collaborate and work with each other, which goes a long way to helping to build, their literacy skills as we're building on storytelling and, and call and response and giving feedback. And then some of the things that we've had continuously, where, we have the Fountas and Pinnell, that we use to track the kids' reading levels. We just introduced the Star Renaissance as an assessment program that has an accelerated reader component, which I think is, is picking up some traction, and that goes all the way down to kindergarten. And then also in this current early literacy grant from the state, we had created some vertical teams in pretty well just about all of our schools, K through 3, but where a great majority of our K first and second grade teachers have gotten access to some high quality literacy professional development from the state. But I think the most important part is that it include the coaching. So I contracted with Keys to Literacy just down the street in Rowley, and I literally have had like a coach, here in the district, just about every day, working at Bartlett and at Silver Hill and at Walnut Square. And I wrote those 3 schools specifically into the grant because they were the 3 places that don't have the full-time coaches, like the other schools do. And so I was trying to close some of those, gaps. So, we are getting there, and just most recently, we've had a handful of kindergarten and first grade teachers from Walnut Square, from Penn Lake, from Bartlett, and from Hunking, for starters, who have recently gotten trained on a new phonics program called Letterland. And we got the resources for them through the grant, and they're going to pilot it for me for the remainder of this school year, to see if it's going to make a difference. Because we don't really have an identifiable phonics program, across the district, in all of our schools. So we're getting there. I'd recently looked at the, nothing against the third graders. I recently looked at the fourth grade MCAS scores, and fourth grade for me was at least, was where my money was, in terms of ELA, because that's like the first grade where we have a consistent feed up, right? So when you get to third grade in Haverhill, you finally have stopped moving around, especially if you started at the kindergarten center, right? And then so you have third grade in a building, and then you have fourth grade in the same building. So fourth grade is really that spot where I'd like to see, how are our kids doing? And the fourth graders are close. I mean, they really are. It's like a point here and a point there, especially in the writing, where where if we can get those couple of points across the fourth grade, we would be in business. So we're pushing the agenda, and and we'll see where it goes. And I think what I will say, when the new superintendent asks me when that time comes, I'll say, look, like I've always said, look, I care, but I don't care, but I care, what the literacy program is, and I believe in the balanced literacy approach. All right, I just want somebody, who knows, maybe she'll say, well, why don't you decide? But just to decide what the literacy programs are going to be. All right, and then let's stick to them, and let's fund them, and let's get them district wide. All right, so that everybody is on the same page, and where the real true cost savings will come is really in the teacher turnover. Not that I think it's really high, because just as an objective Bostonian, I feel like everybody's a Hilly. I'm like, wow, everybody's from here, So, I thought that was the case in Dorchester, where I grew up, So, but we will have our share of teacher turnover, whether it be maternity leaves or people retiring or whatever the case may be. And so the quickest way to be able to catch a new teacher up and have them running, and not have them fall behind, is to be able to tell them, all right, look, this is the phonics program, this is the reading program, this is the writing program, these are the grades we do it in, and all right, can you handle it? All right, fine. Well, then here you go. Let's go. If you can't, all right, we have to hire the next person. So I think that's where we have to get to. And so when we get that in order, then we can, teach more social studies. Because I think if you learn more social studies anyway, we'll save English. All right, And just on that note, because you know how the state is, right? Because I'm getting new history standards, right, which I'm thrilled about. But I'm like, well, but my kids can't read. My kids can't read proficiently. And then, Vargas and his, and his gang are like, well, we all should do civics, which is great. But I'm like, and I'm thrilled. But I'm going to be like, well, Andy, that Declaration of Independence and that Constitution, your fifth graders can't read it. So all right, so we've got some work to do, K to 4 before I can get my own subjects finally off the kiddie table, and nothing against my fellow math and science supervisors who always get more love than I do because they supervise the subjects that are tested. Not that I'm looking for one, but I'm just saying, all right, and that's it.
So I have a follow-up question. So I saw your passion for the fourth graders.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
And I have a third grader, but she's almost a fourth grader.
There you go. And so all the work that you're doing with the early literacy grants is for K to
3, yeah.
K to 3.
Mm-hmm.
Not going lower levels?
Well, we did, and partly because, well, two things, right? My own kids benefited from public pre-K down in Boston. They call it K1. So my third grader has now been in school, and she literally has been in her elementary school for 5 years. And it has made the difference. She's an above grade level reader. And I really don't think it's. I've done my part as a parent, but it's really because of the consistent education she's had, starting from when she was 2.9 or 3, whenever they took her. I said, fine, you can take her. Good. So that's a big part of why I'm also adamant about going to the pre-K level, and then I also think we need it. So I think which is one of the big reasons, and maybe I feel like the state hasn't turned me down yet every time I've applied for something. So when I heard about the preschool expansion grant, and my friend Janet and the other gang, working on it, and I said, well, and Shannon, and I said, well, look, I'll come down and help you guys write this thing, right? I seem to be on a roll, so I came in, and we got all ducks in a row, and I helped to put the package together, burning the midnight oil, and we got it in, and we got the 20K to be able to do the planning. Because I do think if we can get more kids, into pre-K in any capacity around this, here around the city, it's only going to it's only going to help. And so maybe if maybe it's a cart and horse thing, right? So maybe if the EEC is somehow able to make some waves in terms of, especially the high poverty or high needs communities like ours, in expanding preschool, then maybe then the DESE will have no choice but then to say, okay, let's relook at our early literacy money, and maybe we should now expand it to pre-K, because now that more students are serving pre-K. Because they're not going to give me more ELG money outside of the K if I don't have any. If I have one regular ed pre-K classroom basically at the Moody, to serve it with. So I've got to get more bodies on the ground.
Thank you. Tom, now it's your turn.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, thank you. When economists talk about public programs, they often use words like equity and efficiency. Equity meaning everyone is treated either the same or at least equally or fairly in some sense. Efficiency meaning that we're using resources wisely to get the most value from the dollars that we spend. Both concepts, I think, equity and efficiency, are relevant for tonight's discussion. Even in divisive times, Americans share some important common values, and one of these is support for equality of opportunity. We understand that not everyone will have equal access to success in life, but everybody should have an equal opportunity to succeed to the best of their abilities with hard work and a little bit of luck. For nearly 2 centuries, public education has been America's key strategy for creating opportunity. And we learned tonight that Haverhill's path to equal opportunity will be much wider if we can achieve literacy early for all our students. When they become capable readers by grade 3, students can fully benefit from all the Haverhill schools have to offer right through graduation. The question then is, how do we achieve these reading objectives most efficiently? That is, so we get the most for the tax dollars that we're spending. Universal pre-K is an inspiring goal, but it will take some time to secure state funding to make that available to all. In the meantime, we can and should do better with the resources that we have. Haverhill schools already have more than 2,000 students up to grade 3, and only 30% of third graders are meeting expectations, as according to the 2017 MCAS. But Haverhill is doing a lot of things that matter, and we've heard a lot about those things tonight. We have a pre-K public school, we have pre-K private schools in Haverhill, we have an innovative project at Tilton School, a great public library, an effective reading program at the Y. But we need to make reading proficiency part of the DNA of Haverhill schools. So this is something so fundamental as reading should not be left to funding through occasional grants. We've heard a lot tonight about people chasing grants for various things, but I think this reading should be a basic featured part of the district's strategic plan and a regular part of the school budget. This may require funding a dedicated full-time positions to oversee design, planning, development, rollout, alignment with other related programs in the city. It may require additional reading specialists to help teachers in the classroom, additional school hours after school, extended school year perhaps, more summer reading programs, family literacy outreach to engage parents, and more summer reading programs. We may also need improvements in curriculum and high-quality, relevant professional development for our teachers that are aligned with that curriculum. So I would challenge the school committee to provide our new superintendent with dedicated resources to plan for and jumpstart improvements in K-3 reading. This will require specific line items in the fiscal year 2019 school budget earmarked for early literacy initiatives with flexibility for the new superintendent to design a strategy that makes sense for Haverhill. In short, I hope the school committee will make a significant commitment in this year's school budget, specifically earmarked for early reading, and give the new superintendent flexibility to identify, begin implementing the most effective approach. Thank you.
So my question to you is, if you have a magic wand to put one goal on the data strategic plan, what would be your goal?
Goal for the strategic plan, well, I think that
One.
one goal is to achieve, maximize, get Haverhill above the state average in reading at grade 3.
Thank you. And next we have Gail.
Well, it's wonderful to be here. Reading is my lifelong passion. I'm a reading specialist. I came here tonight after teaching a class at Northern Essex. I teach college reading, and it's a developmental level class. And my students would tell you how important it is to be able to read well, because it's a huge barrier to them. They have to pass a developmental course in order to go on to any other courses. So they're adults, and yet they have to pay for a course and take a course and work hard that they get no credit for, but hopefully they'll learn to read well and learn how to use reading to learn. They can all decode. They can read word by word, but that doesn't mean that they can comprehend what they're reading. They haven't made that transition from learning to read to reading to learn. So they're paying a huge price. I was on a panel today at Northern Essex, and it was called Why I Love Politics, which I thought was pretty hysterical because I don't. But my department chair afterwards gave me a book. I don't know if any of you have read it. It's called The Other Wes Moore. And it's an excellent book, but in it, he says at one point that one of the things he found out was that governors use the number of kids who fail reading in the 3rd grade to project prison populations.
That's terrible.
Yes, and I thought as a reading specialist, I know every bad, scary statistic about reading, but that was one scary, bad statistic that I didn't know. So the good thing is we're here, we're talking about it, and there's so many things that we can do because it's one of the things we all agree on. It's fantastic. We all agree that it's important. So I think the first thing we could do is to hire an ELA supervisor for the school district, because we don't have one. And then I think we should have a strategic plan in which reading is the #1 goal. And then I think we should have, there are some grants that are competitive, but there are some grants that all states receive. Title I is one of those grants. And I think we should be very careful as to how we use that money and strategic as how we use that money. And I think the school committee needs to know how that money is being spent and whether it is funding things that are important to us in our strategic plan. I think we need to continue with the literacy collaborative, but we need in-house district trainers. We need to build our professionalism within the district. I'd also like to work with the library and with the Y. We really need to reach out. This is a fabulous community. We have so many wonderful people who are working so hard, but we can't be isolated. The schools cannot do it by themselves, but we have to reach out to our partners, our city council partners, our partners at the library. The library is really great. It has changed. I support it with my fines. That time, because I'm always reading 4 or 5 books at a time. I can't quite figure out how to do that without having them be overdue. But the library is a fabulous place. The new librarian, well, she's not that new anymore, but she's doing wonderful things to get the community engaged. So I think that I would really like to work with her on this project and work with the Y. I know that the school committee is interested in working with the Y and letting them have space in the school for their summer program and putting that in our budget, putting some funding in our budget. I'd also like to have an opportunity to reach out to parents. I mean, parents are constantly being overwhelmed with information about what to do with your kid, and don't give them sugar, and don't do this, and don't do that. But I think that we need to do a better job of reaching out and saying, other than loving them, which is the #1 thing, read to them, talk to them about what they're reading. I think we need to do a much better job of saying, that if you do not read at grade level by age 7 or 8, your chances of dropping out of high school are 13 times higher than somebody who can read. I think parents love their kids. They have all the best intention in the world. We need to do a better job about how much does it cost your child if they can't read. Every parent who really understood that would do more to make sure that their kids were reading well. The other thing that I didn't know is I guess I have constantly learning things, but Dr. Maddox, who's in the audience, invited some of us to, and I've told some people this before, wouldn't you love to meet in the City Hall parking lot at 5:30 in the morning in the dark in the winter and go on a road trip to Springfield? I said, oh yeah, I would love to do that. And then can I spend 6 hours in the car? And I won't drink any coffee because then you'd have to stop on the way. So I had to go at 5:30 in the morning, 3 hours in the car with no coffee. But one of the things that we found out when we were in Springfield is the importance of attendance, that when you have excessive absenteeism, children are losing out all the time. So we have to figure out who are those students and know more about them. Why are they absent? And one of the things that I had never even thought about is dental health is one of the reasons that kids are out of school. So we need to get more involved in that. I also didn't know that some students who get referred for special ed have never had vision screening. Yes. And so we need to make sure that as a public school, that's one of the things we can do, because we certainly wouldn't want someone to be coded and when it's really physical, they just can't see and they haven't been properly screened. So there are ways we can get involved to promote good health for our kids so that they're in school. So those are just some of the things I'm hoping that the school committee will do this year.
So, Gail, the question that I have for you is related to your ESL students, the parents. What do you think, and this is actually linked to what Diane was saying, is that for parents that are foreigners that do not know about the resources, that may not speak the language, what are the things that you think that we should do it as a district to reach out to them?
I think we need to have a better job to always have people who speak another language present at all of our meetings and have everything in Spanish and other languages. And I think that we need to do a better job reaching out at different times. I mean, so many people are working 2 jobs, 3 jobs. And so we can't say, come to the meeting at 6 o'clock, and if people don't come, think that they're not interested in their children.
That's true.
We have to figure out how do we do a better job reaching out in terms of language and in terms of timing as well.
Thank you. And we want to invite now Titus and Amy to the podium. And we also have a couple of questions here. And I think this question can be answered by any of you guys. Here we go. Data show less fortunate have a big disadvantage. Why isn't more of the conversation about how we're going to reach these students? And I think some of you already have been talking a little bit about that. Can you elaborate? The less advantaged students, the less fortunate.
So I think we've touched on this a little bit here tonight, but there's 2 main things I'll say. And if there's one fact, there's plenty of facts to remember from tonight, but if there's one thing that should upset you, it's that last week I ran through the numbers, the per pupil spending numbers for the city of Haverhill, and as I do every single year, last year about 89% of school districts in Massachusetts invested more per pupil than our district. And this year, 95% of districts in Massachusetts invest more per pupil than the city of Haverhill. Now, it's an uncomfortable conversation to talk about money, especially politicians. We stay away from it, right? But we have to have that conversation because this is going to cost us somewhere down the line, right? In public safety dollars, in the criminal justice system. And so when we talk about addressing economically disadvantaged students, we have to realize that if we want to take this seriously, we have to make a serious investment in mental health, in trauma services, in after-school programs, in ensuring that the vast majority of families in Haverhill have access to pre-K, even those that can't afford it. So if we're serious about this, the funding component needs to be big on that. The other thing, and Gail kind of touched on this, that I really took away from that fun 5 a.m. trip to Springfield, was the cross-sector collaboration that was happening in Springfield, right? The district played a major role, there's no question about it. And we know that our schools are doing tremendous work. We have some great literacy coaches, some great principals. If you're involved in literacy or a principal, can you stand up right now, please, so we can recognize you? If you're a principal in Haverhill Public Schools or a literacy coach, please stand up. Thank you for everything that you do. Being married to a teacher has changed my perspective completely, so I have an intimate window into all that. So thank you. And so when we look at cross-sector collaboration, how do we first go to the people who are on the ground doing the work and ask them what's working, what's not working, what needs to be scaled across the district? And then how do we bring in, as Gail mentioned, the YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club, the libraries, the health centers, that are all playing a role in the lives of economically disadvantaged students. So if a student is showing up to play basketball at the Y but isn't attending school, there's some communication happening between the Y and the district, right? And so those are sort of two key components that I think we really need to take seriously if we want to address economically disadvantaged students, the funding and the cross-sector collaboration.
Thank you. Gail?
I think we have a great need for a data warehouse. That's one of the things they talked about in Springfield, so that we share data. I mean, the example that Andy just gave is a perfect example. Our students are involved in many activities, many organizations, and if we had, obviously we would need permission to share that information, but we would be much better child advocates if we could share that information and it could be shared with us. Mr. Rosa, who was in the audience, he's on the school committee, and he came out on that trip too, and he and I have talked about what's doable right away. And one of the things that they told us in Springfield is that middle-income households have 13, in general, at any given time, have 13 books per child. Low-income, 1 book per 300 children. So something that seems to me to be really simple and doable that we can do right away is to get books, to get thousands of books and distribute them. And I think that's a very doable thing that the whole community would work with us to do, and we could be the conveners of that effort. So that's something I'm very interested in doing. And I think it's not easy to do, but it's doable.
Well, I think while we're getting those books into the hands of the families, we also have to help the parents know how to use those books, how to be successful, showing them how easy it is to be a part of their child's education. And I think if they're not familiar with that, that we have to have volunteers, whether it's teachers, whether it's former parents whose children have been successful in the Haverhill Public Schools, but people that are willing to help these parents know how easy it is to use this book to help their child's education.
Thank you. Titus and Amy, have you guys seen examples of communities that where they have a data warehouse, and how that work? And how we can implement that in Haverhill?
Yeah, I think the Springfield example is the best one we've heard of so far. So I would encourage you to reach out, and we can help connect you to the data person. It has to do with, tracking the student identifier from the community-based programs over to the public school, so that you're aware of some of the needs and challenges of students and families before they even register for kindergarten. So that's one that I would encourage you to look at.
We've also seen the state of Rhode Island, it's connected to their health care, it's not education, a unique identifier, so that they're supporting children starting at birth throughout, so that there are different ways to think about how to collect the data. We've also seen Lawrence, when they worked on the preschool expansion grant, they worked on looking and connecting that data set of preschool-age children, even if the public school's not serving them, to make sure that there's a stronger connection. One of the things Springfield learned is as families were looking for early education can be hard to find because it is in many different forms, in family child care and centers. So families were going to the public schools, so they were considering to embed 2 early education experts in the public school office, so that when families came in, there would be someone with content expertise to help think about the birth to 5 population. But we would be happy to think about with Haverhill, because we think the size. What we have seen with communities is you have to look at you have to put a lot of pieces of publicly available data together that doesn't exist in one place, and then check it to make sure it's right.
Sure.
So if there's 32 kindergarten classrooms, make sure that you know how many kids are in each one of those classrooms. You know, how many 4-year-olds are there in Haverhill? How many are in some formal setting?
Sure.
So it's critical to get the real good numbers.
Thank you.
And we do have a recent, but intentional collaborative effort, looking at, the issues, that in terms first of education and opportunity that are affecting some of our poorest communities through the Mount Washington Alliance, and I've been representing the school district, on the Alliance, this school year. So there is, sort of this, dedicated group that's really trying to tackle, all sorts of, things, especially education and even, workforce opportunities, here in some of our poorest neighborhoods.
Thank you. Tom, you want to say something?
Well, when you're talking about sort of the gap that you start out between the economically disadvantaged and the non-economically disadvantaged in the early grades, one thing we should be striving for as we're setting up our systems for data and accountability is we should be looking for that gap to be closing as people approach their high school years. So even though we may see a big gap with people coming from a lot of different places in the early grades, by the time they get to Haverhill High, we should see a much narrower gap, and we should really strive for that so that by the time they get to Rashawn, you're gonna you're gonna not have as much variation to deal with.
That's right.
Thank you. The next question is, are there service learning opportunities for high school students to read with younger students? That's a good idea, isn't it? Do we have anything like that in the high school system?
Not that I know, and I don't think we have something that's specifically a service learning. We had students, high school students, who came on Dr. Seuss Day and read, but that wasn't a service learning model.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's a huge opportunity, I think, to get the youth of the community involved in this sort of early literacy challenge, right? It's often an untapped resource in the community is the youth, and in some cases college-age students, but high school as well. In New Bedford, the community near where I live, we are trying to do literacy ambassadors, so the things that Gail spoke of earlier, finding people who aren't necessarily teachers, but who can go into the community and be that ambassador, model literacy behaviors, model how to hold a book, point with your finger when you read the book. We're trying to work we're in 4 laundromats right now in New Bedford, and we're trying to go throughout the whole community to turn laundromats into like a reading area, because we know that that's a place where a lot of families, particularly low income, if they don't have a washing machine at home, they spend time. And if there are small kids, make that a reading opportunity. Get the high school students. We've got 1 volunteer there who will read in the laundromat. Thank you very much. But yeah, I think you have to think creatively when we get to, trying to figure out how to serve all children in the community.
That's a nice idea. Okay, this question is long and applies to all of you again. Here we go. How do we better increase communication between parents, families, schools, elected officials, and community organizations so that we are all working together, supporting each other to reach common goals?
When we look at communities, even if the city or the district or the mayor or the school committee can't put any funding in, using the bully pulpit, whether you're a community member or a mayor or an elected official, to send a message that Haverhill cares about this issue. We were tweeting earlier and somebody already retweeted and said, "This is Haverhill." So how no matter where you are, that you know that this is a priority in the community. And we've seen many different kind of tactics, but it really is building that culture and relationship within your community, you know, and any leadership position as well as other community members. It's a priority.
I think the Haverhill Education Coalition is really working toward that goal of really engaging the community members in thinking about the schools. What do we want for our schools? Our members attend school committee meetings. We meet monthly and discuss issues. We have events like this. So we're really, I think, doing a lot to engage people, and I think we're seeing out in Haverhill a lot of people being more attuned to some of the issues that address public education.
Yeah, and sort of on a micro level, a perfect example is tonight to try to get some more folks from the neighborhood here and English language learners. Earlier this morning, I messaged one of the teachers from this school, and I said, "Hey, could you message some of your parents or email them or get in touch with them?" And she said, "Okay, don't worry about it. I have a WhatsApp group with my parents," right? WhatsApp is highly used in immigrant communities. So there's that level of cultural sensitivity and knowing where to reach your parents. And so we had that in a teacher here, and we have that in many teachers across the district. So how do we scale that? That's sort of on the micro level. Haverhill Education Coalition, again, is doing a great job on the macro level, getting people together to talk about the issues. And the whole idea behind Haverhill Promise is to be exactly that, right? That the convener for grade level reading initiatives here in the city of Haverhill. And Haverhill Education Coalition is doing a great job talking about this particular topic and also other education-related issues that are happening across the district. So the idea behind Haverhill Promise is to create working groups around readiness, attendance, and summer learning, because we know that these are the three buckets that largely affect grade level reading proficiency by the end of the third grade. So our goal is to set up working groups comprised of the districts, the community organizations, the health organizations, the parents, to facilitate that type of communication. But part of that takes a lot of us, many of us, checking our egos, right? We all have we're proud and we're excited about the work that we do. And so as a community, we have to be willing to keep the vision, keep the mission as our focus, and be willing to all of us, including myself, check our egos at times. Thank you.
Anybody else? No? So one of the things, I do have a question. I don't know who is the person who should be answering this. So throughout the discussion, it seems that one of the common threads has to do with funding, either funding from the state, funding through grant, funding per pupil. And as we're looking for something that would be effective in Haverhill, we need to think about what would be the most reasonable, sustainable source of funding, because so then it's a continuity with the programs that we're doing. Are there any plans to increase the investment per pupil? Who answered that question?
The school committee hasn't started the budget process in that, as you know, or you may not know, Mayor, there is a strong mayor form of government, and usually what happens is the mayor will suggest what he thinks is a good and reasonable percentage, and then we have, one thing everybody could do is we have public hearings on the budget, and I would invite people to come and say that they would like support for reading. And that's one great thing. If people could come, we have public hearings, and usually we have one person. Sometimes we have no people. So it would be great if people came and expressed their support for strong funding.
Thank you. Any last words? How are we doing? We're doing good? Yeah?
Stay tuned.
Well, thank you everybody for being here. We hope that more opportunities like this will come and you guys continue to participate in and sharing events like this with other people so they can also participate. And
concludes our evening. I have a long list of thank yous, so please bear with me. I'd like to thank our speakers and our panelists this evening. Amy and Titus, we really appreciate you being here, your expertise, and going through the data with us. And I'm very hopeful that will spark a really meaningful conversation about where we go next.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
Yes. Thank you. Dr. Custodia Laura, we really appreciate you representing the higher education, our jewel of the community, Northern Essex, and we're very fortunate that we have it and that you are continuing to push our students to reach higher. Thank you. Rashawn and Diane, we want to thank you for your expertise. You are on the front lines of what we do, and what you see and what you think really does matter, and it's valuable for information. Hopefully we can act upon it. So.
Thank you.
Andy and Gail, you have shown us time and time again that our students are important to you, education is important to you. We thank you for your tireless work, your leadership, and we appreciate you being here. I want to thank Tom Graneman. He's our Vice President of Haverhill Ed Coalition. He is a tremendous asset to our community. He volunteers a great deal of time, and he's been doing it just on behalf of this Haverhill students. The work you have done so far has really made an impact on the city, and we appreciate it. I would like to thank Bernadette with the Merrimack Valley Project. Bernadette has been hard at work back there translating for us, so thank you. I would like to thank my team at Haverhill Ed Coalition. They have worked like tremendous hours, so much work to get this event happening, and actually events that are in the future already going. Tom Graneman, Helen Zabitnoff, Jill Story, Janet Bijan, Joe LeBlanc, Katrina Hobbs-Everett, Tim Jordan, Seth Cordis, Ed Felker, and Devin Ferreira. I'd like to thank Tina Fuller at the Haverhill Education Foundation for being a constant supporter for us. We'd like to thank Consentino and all of its staff. We know how much work an event like this is for setup, preparations, and just working with us. It's been really tremendous. Thank you. We'd like to thank the John Maddox Foundation. And we would like to thank WHAV and HC Media for broadcasting us live. And I know it's been a long night, but before we go, Haverhill Ed Coalition would like you to save the date for Monday, June 18th. We'll be hosting our next big event in partnership with the YMCA. It's a family event in which we will celebrate the magic of reading with Patriots wide receiver Malcolm Mitchell. And so be on the lookout for more information, and that will be a family event. And then last but not least, if you are interested in hearing any more information about Haverhill Ed Coalition, just let us know. And then we have monthly meetings, and it's open to the public. We would love it if you came and joined in this great community that is really making a difference. So, thank you.
Thank Joanna as well.